You know, when you think of Newburgh, New York, you probably don't think of George Washington, but maybe you should. Just last week, I sat down with Michael McGurty from the New Windsor Cantonment State Historic Site, and we discussed about some pivotal moments in American history that happened right in the Hudson Valley during the Revolutionary War. Well, let's talk about the headquarters, and we'll get into a second about what happened here, but give an idea for folks watching at home what happened at these headquarters and its significance, really at a defining moment of this nation.
The Continental Army spent much of the war in the Hudson Highlands. General Washington did as well. It was our most important base and largest concentration of soldiers. So all of the houses in this area at one point or another had soldiers staying at them or had officers using them as headquarters. And this house was occupied for almost 2 years. One of the longest occupied military headquarters of the war by a series of Continental Army generals.
In the minds of many, you know, once 1776 happened, America, we were on our way. But I read a recent story, and you'd be the perfect person to give this context to. In 1780 to 1783, we had some money problems, and the soldiers that we were being asked to be on the front lines of this, they hadn't been paid in months, in some cases even years, and there were many who were agitating to say, hey, the best way to make things right here is literally to have the Army threaten Congress with violence or an uprising. And we then bring ourselves to the meeting, or the conspiracy, as they said, the Newburgh meeting or conspiracy in 1783, and none other than George Washington had a defining moment, not only in that conversation with the troops, but really the direction this country in many ways went.
In 1780, you had the worst defeat of the war for the American Army. Charleston fell in May, and over 5,000 soldiers were captured. Basically, in one fell swoop, the entire Southern American Army was eliminated. We cobbed together another army under General Gates, sent them down. They were defeated at the Battle of Camden. Things were bad. The country was bankrupt. The whole paper money scheme had fallen apart. They were trying to come up with a new way to finance the war, and our government did what our government does best, borrowed money.
And there was a disagreement in the government, too, as to the obligations it had financially to the troops, right?
What they went to is specific requisitions. They tried to get the states to give in their fair share into the central pot to deliver it up to the Army as a whole, but State X is not going to give if State Y doesn't give. So the Army suffered considerably, and when I'm talking about 1780, many officers were resigning by that point, seeing the cause as hopeless. The only thing holding the Army together was the officers keeping the soldiers to their duty. So Congress agreed to, against many people's reservations, is this pension.
So the officers, egged on by some to say, we got to have an insurrection here, or at least a threat of one, to get Congress to finally take our needs seriously. It had reached a boiling point. And then none other than in this place, George Washington comes in to the surprise of his troops and tries to rally them around the cause. And there was a singular moment in there that was unscripted, that in many ways changed the sentiment, brought it together, and more than 200 and almost 30 years later, we are where we are. Give an idea of what happened in that meeting, or the Newburgh meeting conspiracy as it's known.
The actual conspiracy itself originated within the Continental Congress. You had a nationalist element with certain people like Robert Morris, who was a superintendent of finance, Gouverneur Morris, the transplanted New Yorker who helped write the New York Constitution. He was also the one who helped write a good deal of the federal Constitution, Alexander Hamilton. They were all for a strong central government with the power to raise revenue. So taking the strength of the Army and stirring the Army up to have the Army menace Congress would advance their cause to have this strong central government. When Washington heard about the first letter, he said, I had hoped that officers would disregard such an irregular invitation, because the letters had called for them to meet the next day, but he banned that. And then he authorized a second meeting, one for March 15th, which gave him time to manage the crisis. And he did a very important thing. he went and talked to all the troop commanders. This is a staff plot. This is scheming staff officers. Staff officers don't command soldiers. The guys who really matter are the ones who command the troops. And he met with all of them to shore up his position, and they assured him they would not allow their troops to be used for such nefarious purposes.
There was a moment in there, like there is in so many speeches, where it's not the scripted punchline, but the delivery. And failing eyesight, give the background and then give that famous quote.
He authorizes this meeting, and all it was supposed to be is a meeting for the Committee of Congress, General McDougal of New York, Colonel Matthias Ogden of New Jersey, and Colonel John Brooks of Massachusetts, to present to the assembled officers what they have been doing on behalf of the Army, basically lobbying for this pension. And Washington was not supposed to be there. And then all of a sudden he shows up and begs permission to address this esteemed gathering. He gets up there and he reads this incredibly impassioned speech. And at the end, he looks out into the audience and they're just looking at him. And you realize in desperation, I'm not hitting the mark. He had never before ever spoke to his assembled officers. So in desperation, he goes and he reaches for a letter from his friend, a Virginia delegate to the Continental Congress, Joseph Jones. And he pulls it out. Washington's own letter is in very large script because he had written it himself. It's in the Massachusetts Historical Society. The Jones letter is written in normal script. Finally, he gives up and he puts his glasses on. And he goes, "Gentlemen, you forgive me. I've not only grown gray in the service of my country, but nearly blind as well." And for that poignant moment, the great iconic captain on horseback was gone, and in his stead was revealed a fellow sufferer aged beyond his years. People who were in the beginning of the war could remember the red-haired guy with the slightly tinge of gray who took command of that army in Boston in 1775. And now this old man is staring down before him, and a lot of them ashamed of themselves. And they realize you're turning against him, who's done everything for you. Some openly wept. Washington, realizing that the compassion, he just quickly gathered up all his papers and left. And General Knox, one of his trusted confidants, led the assembly in denouncing the letters.
Finally, Mike, it's clear from this conversation, not just the student, but you love this.
Yes.
And for passerbys like myself and others, when we read that iconic moment that Washington had with his troops, that tenuous point in American history, the public seems to be coming around. Lincoln, obviously, was a revelation to some, at least, as to, again, that point in American history. For those who want to learn the beginnings of it, both here and in the immediate area here in the Valley, it's a great story, isn't it? It's
a fantastic story. And there's so many wonderful... Unfortunately and fortunately, the Hudson Highlands has so many important historic sites, we kind of drown each other out. It's a wealth of resources which makes an average visitor go, geez, which one do I go see? Yeah. Well, any of them are great. Yeah. And they're going to give you a different outlook on the American Revolution. Well, Mike, I really appreciate the time and the hospitality. Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much. And speaking of the Hudson Valley, on the other side of the break, we'll have some headlines. Stay with us.